The sirens wailed not to save, but to seize. In the dim haze of a small-town dusk, Deputy Aaron Miles, once hailed as the town's most reliable badge, was handcuffed by the very officers who once saluted him. As his knees buckled and tears streamed down his face, the only thing louder than the cuffs clicking shut was the question that rang through every citizen's mind. What had he done? The late autumn air was crisp in Brookhaven, but it wasn't the chill that made people shiver that Thursday evening. It was the sirens. Loud, unrelenting, but oddly wrong. These weren't the sirens of an emergency. These were deliberate, tactical, surgical. A convoy of unmarked vehicles turned into the precinct parking lot just before dusk. Inside, Deputy Aaron Miles was finishing paperwork, same as any other day. Outside, four officers, all in plain clothes, stepped out of their vehicles with precise coordination. Two of them had once served under Miles. One had called him a mentor, and now, not a single one could meet his eyes. When the door opened, Miles looked up casually, expecting an update, maybe a question about a pending report. Instead, he saw the badges. Not Brookhaven PD, Internal Affairs. And in that split second, the air seemed to vanish from the room. Deputy Miles, one of the agents said, voice flat, unreadable. Please step outside. At first, he didn't move. Then slowly, deliberately, he stood, his brow furrowed. What's this about? No one answered. As he stepped into the parking lot, the golden light of the setting sun glinted off the cuffs in the agent's hands. Reality hit like a fist. His instinct was to resist, not violently, but vocally. This is a mistake. You're wrong. I haven't done anything. Turn around, the agent said. A small crowd had already gathered on the far side of the lot. It was Brookhaven. News spread fast. A local baker, a school teacher, a young woman holding her toddler, all staring, watching, their expressions a mirror of disbelief. Miles looked toward his patrol SUV, then toward the flag hanging limp at half-mast from the precinct pole, then to his knees, which gave out just as the cuffs closed around his wrists. He hit the pavement with a thud and let out a sound that was not quite a sob, but not far from it. A guttural sound, a man's pride unraveling in real time. Please, he said under his breath, don't do this. Not here. Not like this. But they did. The former golden boy of Brookhaven PD, clean record, Medal of Valor, Community Service Awards, was escorted across the parking lot in full view of the town. One of the agents read him his rights as cameras from the local news station began to roll. You have the right to remain silent. Deputy Miles' lips trembled. His head hung low. For years, he had arrested others. For drugs. For fraud. For theft. For betrayal. And now, with his boots scraping the concrete, he realized this was what it felt like on the other side. Powerless. Naked, erased. Inside the precinct, whispers spread like wildfire. Did you hear? They say it's about missing evidence. Was he selling it? Framing people? I heard it's been going on for years. By the time they reached the holding cell, the man who once led the morning roll call couldn't even meet his own reflection in the glass. A mirror mounted high above the door caught his expression. Defeated. Ashamed, cornered. But what made it worse, far worse, was the silence from the others. Deputy Carla Vance, who he once covered for during a family emergency, avoided eye contact. Sergeant Jenkins, his former academy classmate, pretended to be on the phone as Miles passed. Even the rookie, Officer Duncan, who once referred to him as Uncle Miles, stood frozen with his hand on his belt, refusing to move. They were all there. Yet he was utterly alone. In the interrogation room, no questions were asked yet. Just paperwork, fingerprints, standard procedure. But for Miles, it felt ceremonial, like a burial. Outside, Chief Halvorson made a brief statement to the press. We are cooperating fully with state and federal investigations. While we are shocked and saddened by these allegations, we believe in due process and accountability. No matter the badge. No matter the badge. That phrase echoed like a death toll in Miles' mind. He had worn his badge with pride, hadn't he? He'd responded to shootings, fires, break-ins. He'd been a pallbearer at a fallen officer's funeral, a counselor to the troubled, a fixture at the high school's career day. And yet here he was accused, surrounded, erased. As the booking process continued, he finally whispered something to himself, so low, the clerk barely caught it. I tried to stop it. What was that? The clerk asked. Miles didn't repeat it. He just closed his eyes and let the tears come. Quiet, controlled, but unmistakable. He wasn't crying out of guilt. Not entirely. It was more complex. A mix of betrayal, both given and received, a fear of what came next, and a knowledge that once the cuffs go on, there's no going back to who you were. Deputy Aaron Miles was no longer the protector of Brookhaven. He was now its greatest mystery, and the trial hadn't even begun. In through an encrypted message. Anonymous, precise, and impossible to ignore. Unit 312B. Parkview Storage. Registered under the name Derek Mann. Everything you need is inside. At first glance, it looked like a prank, a red herring, but Internal Affairs had learned to trust the unexpected. And in the case of Deputy Aaron Miles, they were already knee-deep in what felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. This message, it didn't just offer a piece, it offered the whole picture. An undercover task force followed up within hours. They didn't knock. They didn't notify Brookhaven PD. Not after what had just happened. Trust was too fragile now, and leaks were too costly. With a court-ordered warrant and bolt cutters in hand, they approached the rusted blue door of Unit 312 just after 2 a.m. What they found inside changed the case forever. The room was small, maybe the size of a modest bedroom. It smelled of cold metal, dust, and something older, like mildew-covered secrets. A single bulb dangled from the ceiling, casting a pale halo over rows of sealed boxes. Labeled, cataloged, too organized to be forgotten, too intentional to be innocent. Box 1. BPD Case 98-204, closed. Box 2. Evidence Narcotics, March 2017. Box 3. Unlogged Seizures Confidential. One of the officers opened the first box, expecting old paperwork. Instead, he found a sealed evidence bag, marked with a Brookhaven PD label, containing 2 ounces of heroin. The seal had been cut and then re-glued. Sloppily, almost like someone panicked midway through covering their tracks. More bags followed. Some had drugs. Others had burner phones, unregistered firearms, stacks of cash, even blood-stained articles of clothing. None of it was where it should have been. And yet, here it was, in a unit registered under a fake name, paid in cash monthly for the past 3 years. The name Derek Mann was a ghost, a fabricated identity tied to a burner account with no real paper trail, except for one link. Surveillance footage from the storage facility showed a man entering the unit twice in the past month. Though the footage was grainy and taken from an angle, facial recognition software returned a 94% match. Deputy Aaron Miles. Back at headquarters, investigators pieced together what this meant. Many of the items found in the locker belonged to cases Miles had handled directly. Drug busts where the evidence suddenly went missing. Closed investigations with irregularities in the chain of custody reports. There was a pattern, a chilling one. What made it worse was the logbook discovered in Box 6. Handwritten, coded, but ultimately decipherable. It contained dates, amounts, and initials. Some corresponded with actual criminal cases. Others, disturbingly, were tied to internal police memos. It hinted at a side operation, One where evidence was being filtered, redistributed, or sold back into the very community the department had sworn to protect. One entry read, February 14th, MCH, $4,000, return half/dump rest. MCH was shorthand for Marcus Caldwell Harris, a known gang affiliate arrested in a drug sting Miles had overseen. The charges had mysteriously been dropped due to insufficient evidence. Now, it made sense. The evidence never made it to court because it ended up in that storage unit. Controlled, hidden, manipulated. The implication was horrifying. Deputy Miles hadn't just stolen. He hadn't just tampered. He'd played God, deciding which criminals walked, which cases collapsed, and which pieces of evidence saw the light of day. All from a locked box in a forgotten corner of town. But one question loomed over the task force like a shadow. Why? Theories swirled. Was it greed? Blackmail? An operation bigger than him? Or was he trying to protect someone? Maybe himself? The discovery of the unit sent shockwaves through the legal system. Defense attorneys filed motions to revisit past convictions. Prosecutors panicked as compromised evidence from the locker threatened to unravel multiple cases. One senior officer who had worked closely with Miles resigned without comment the following morning. And Brookhaven? It turned on itself. The headlines were relentless. Hero cop or master manipulator? How deep does the rot go in Brookhaven PD? The story reached national news within a day. Miles, still in holding, was confronted with the findings. He said nothing, no denials, no explanations, just sat there, stone-faced. The tears from his arrest were gone, replaced by something colder. Perhaps resignation, perhaps guilt, perhaps calculation. His defense attorney issued a brief statement. My client maintains he was acting under coercion and in the best interest of the community. Full details will emerge at trial, but the evidence said otherwise. Cold, physical, inescapable. The storage locker didn't just contain items. It contained a second life. A double existence Miles had kept secret from the badge, the department, and the people who trusted him. And for the prosecutors building their case, it was no longer just a question of what Miles had done. It was now about how far he'd gone, and who else might be buried in the files he tried to hide. Aaron Miles' trial. The prosecution had painted a brutal picture. The courtroom was filled with boxes of evidence. Surveillance footage, marked bags, financial records, and the damning contents of a hidden storage locker. The jury had watched Miles' arrest. They'd seen his face, his tears, his silence. The narrative was clear. A trusted deputy had gone rogue. A man who once led with honor had descended into criminal manipulation. And yet, something didn't quite sit right. He wasn't fighting. He wasn't pleading. He wasn't denying. It was almost like he was waiting. Then came the surprise no one anticipated. She walked into the courtroom with a measured stride, the silence so heavy it felt like a second heartbeat. Officer Lena Hart, young, composed, and visibly shaken, but determined. Her badge was clipped to her belt, her uniform crisp, but her eyes held storms. She had requested to testify voluntarily. The defense had not called her. The prosecution had not asked her. But when her name appeared in several of the coded entries from the locker's logbook, the court had to listen. She was sworn in under full scrutiny. And what she said next cracked the case wide open. Deputy Miles didn't start this. He was dragged into it. The room shifted, eyebrows raised, pens stopped moving. Even Judge Ortega leaned forward slightly. Officer Hart took a deep breath before continuing. I was a rookie when I joined Brookhaven PD. Nervous, green, but Deputy Miles, he was good to me. He trained me, protected me, never once made me feel small. That's important because what I saw later, it didn't match the man I knew. She looked toward Miles. He wouldn't meet her eyes. About 2 years ago, I stayed late one night. Everyone else had gone. I was finishing up reports. That's when I heard voices. One of them was Deputy Miles. The other was Captain Rourke. That name sent a jolt through the room. Rourke had retired 6 months ago. No one had expected his name to surface now. They were arguing. I couldn't hear everything, but I heard this sentence clear as day. "If you don't keep covering it, Miles, they'll tear the whole department apart, and you with it." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Hart continued. "Later, I confronted Miles. I asked him what it meant. He told me to forget I heard anything, that if I wanted to keep my badge, I needed to stay out of it. But I couldn't forget. Over time, I noticed things. Reports altered, evidence disappearing. Miles started to change. He became paranoid. Hence, he stopped mentoring rookies. He was ashamed." Her voice cracked slightly, but she pushed through. "One night, he came to me. He said he couldn't do it anymore, that he was trying to find a way out without hurting anyone else. He said he kept records, not for blackmail, but as insurance. If something happened to him, the truth would still come out." She looked around the room, locking eyes with the jury. That storage unit? It wasn't part of some criminal empire. It was his evidence against them, a way to expose what was going on if internal affairs ever came knocking. He wasn't a mastermind. He was a scapegoat, a man trying to stop a sinking ship without going down with it. The courtroom was stunned. The defense attorney sat frozen. The prosecutor whispered frantically to her associate. The judge called for a 10-minute recess, but the damage had already been done. When court resumed, the cross-examination began. The prosecutor was ruthless. "Officer Hart, are you suggesting that every piece of evidence found in that unit was planted by someone else?" "No," Hart replied. "I'm saying Deputy Miles wasn't alone in handling that evidence. I believe others used him as a buffer, and when he tried to break free, he became a threat. Do you have proof of this alleged conspiracy?" "No paper trail. Just memories, conversations, patterns. But they all point to one thing. Miles wasn't acting alone." The prosecutor turned to the jury, clearly unconvinced. But the seeds of doubt had been planted. And it wasn't just about facts anymore. It was about perception, about intent, about the fragile line between justice and survival. In the hallway after her testimony, Officer Hart was met with whispers. Some praised her bravery, others called her a traitor. But she didn't flinch. She knew what she saw, and she knew the system couldn't clean itself from the inside if no one was willing to pull the trigger. Back in the courtroom, Deputy Miles remained expressionless, still silent, still unreadable. But when Officer Hart passed him on her way out, he finally looked up. Their eyes met, and for just a moment, something passed between them. Not gratitude, not regret. Something quieter, like release. The testimony had shifted everything. For the first time since his arrest, the jury wasn't just looking at a criminal. They were looking at a man who might have been trying, failing perhaps, but trying to do the right thing. And that made the trial no longer just about what Miles had done, but why he'd done it. Testimony from Officer Lena Hart shifted the tone of the trial, but not its weight. Her words had introduced doubt, just enough to crack the clean-cut image of Deputy Miles as a lone criminal. But doubt doesn't override evidence. And what the prosecutors revealed next brought the courtroom crashing back to earth. Forensic accountants were called to the stand. Their investigation, which had been running parallel to the trial preparations, was clinical and precise. No emotion, no speculation, just numbers. They showed a series of undisclosed accounts, shell corporations traced to out-of-state banking institutions. These accounts had received irregular deposits over a span of 4 years. The totals weren't astronomical, but they were specific. Transfers ranging from $2,500 to $11,000, often made within days of major drug seizures or closed cases Miles had managed. Each deposit was tagged to aliases, fake businesses, ghosts on paper. But the names weren't random. One by one, the prosecution matched them to suspects who had mysteriously evaded conviction under Miles' oversight. Known gang affiliates, repeat offenders. Some of them were never even charged. Others walked out of courtrooms due to lost evidence or procedural errors. Errors that now looked intentional. Still, the defense fought back. Coincidence, they argued. Circumstantial at best. Then came the real blow. Recovered communications. Using a court order, cyber analysts had pulled deleted text messages and emails from Miles' encrypted devices. The material was damning. A string of messages, coded but decipherable, indicated coordination with individuals connected to criminal operations. In one message, Miles typed, "Red bag never made it to intake. Do what you need to do. This stays off the books." Another, dated 3 days after a major fentanyl seizure. "Too hot to push now. Sit on it. Wait a few weeks." And then, the worst one. "We do what we have to. It's not about right or wrong anymore. It's about survival." That message had been sent just weeks before his arrest. The courtroom fell into silence after the words were read aloud. The prosecution paused, letting the weight of that sentence settle over the jurors. It was more than evidence. It was a confession, if not of action, then of intent. Deputy Aaron Miles may have started with good intentions. He may have been caught in something larger. But at some point, he had crossed the line and never turned back. His defense attorney tried to spin it. "That message," she argued, "is the voice of a man under pressure. A man trapped in a system that demanded compromise to function. If anything, it proves he hated what he had become." But the jury's eyes told another story. Because the next piece of evidence couldn't be rationalized. A wiretap. Legal. Authorized. Clean. 1 month before the arrest. Internal Affairs had planted surveillance inside Miles' patrol vehicle. One of the recordings captured a conversation between Miles and an unknown contact. Voice masked, never identified. But Miles' voice was unmistakable. "I tried to clean it up. I really did. But they wouldn't let me. So I played along. I kept the system alive, because if I didn't, I'd be next." "Next for what?" the voice asked. "A raid. A frame job. Disgrace. Death. Who knows? They'd find something. That's what they do. So what now? Now, I make sure the rot stays contained. That's all I can do." The prosecutors didn't need to say it. But they did. He knew he was part of the rot. And he chose to keep it going. The defense pushed back. He was scared. He wasn't just preserving himself. He was preserving the department. He believed that if everything came out, Brookhaven PD would collapse. That was the moral complexity of the trial. Did Aaron Miles perpetuate corruption to protect others, or did he simply fold to it? More troubling, perhaps, was what the evidence didn't say. Because while the files, transfers, and recordings incriminated Miles, they also pointed to a larger system. One that operated silently, strategically, and with enough force to make a respected deputy believe he had no other choice. But none of those others were on trial. Not yet. The judge reminded the courtroom of that as the 4th week of proceedings closed. This court is not here to investigate the sins of the entire Brookhaven Police Department. We are here to judge one man's actions. It was a warning, a boundary, and perhaps a lament. But the jury couldn't ignore the facts. No matter how Miles got there, coerced, manipulated, or defeated, he had walked into the fire and left others to burn. He had handled the evidence. He had falsified the reports. He had opened the storage locker with his own key, and the law demanded accountability. What remained unclear was whether the jury would treat him as the villain or the last man standing in a house already set ablaze. The courtroom emptied in silence. 12 men and women stepped into a guarded room upstairs, a narrow space with a long table, a coffee pot in the corner, and the unbearable weight of someone else's fate. The door closed behind them, and the world outside waited. The trial of Deputy Aaron Miles had ended, but its echo still rang. The judge had issued strict instructions. The law was clear. Miles was being tried on multiple counts: tampering with evidence, obstruction of justice, criminal conspiracy, and abuse of power. Each count required a separate verdict. Each carried years, decades, behind bars. But facts are one thing. Conscience is another. And what the jury carried into deliberation wasn't just paper. It was burden. At first, they reviewed the evidence mechanically. Surveillance footage of the storage unit, testimonies, bank statements, the damning wiretap. Some of the jurors took notes. Others just sat in silence, watching the video of Miles unlocking the unit with his own key, his own hand. He did it. One juror whispered, "We've seen it." A woman across the table disagreed. "Yes, but why did he do it?" "That matters." Voices rose and fell. There was no shouting, just the steady unraveling of uncertainty. One juror, a former teacher, brought up Officer Lena Hart's testimony. He called it the pivot point. She didn't have to come forward. She risked her career to say what she said. Why would she lie? Another juror responded sharply. Maybe she wanted to protect him. Maybe she was part of it. Or maybe, a third said, she saw a man trying to hold back an avalanche. That was the word that kept returning. Avalanche. Because that's what Miles had described in the wiretap. Not a scheme. Not a master plan. But something he couldn't stop. Something that would crush him and everyone else if he didn't manage it carefully. For hours, they circled back through timelines. The drug busts, the missing evidence, the suspicious releases of known criminals. Every path led to Miles, but many of those same paths also hinted at others. Unindicted, unnamed, untouched. Juror number 7, a retired police dispatcher, was the first to voice what others had been afraid to say. He was guilty, but I don't think he's the most guilty. Heads nodded slowly. And yet guilt is guilt. The law didn't ask them to determine who started the fire, only who poured gasoline on it. They debated well into the night, breaking only for water and rest. The foreman insisted on rereading every charge. They even replayed the audio of Miles in the patrol car. I tried to clean it up. I really did. But they wouldn't let me. We do what we have to. It's not about right or wrong anymore. It's about survival. One juror couldn't let it go. That's not survival. That's surrender. But another countered. No, that's someone trying to keep the system from imploding. He knew if he exposed it, innocent officers might get dragged into it, maybe even killed. Then he should have gone to internal affairs. He did. Through that locker. It was all there. He kept the records for a reason. By 1:17 a.m., they took their first vote. It wasn't unanimous. Not even close. They paused again. More coffee. More silence. At 2:39 a.m., they revisited the bank records. Some believed Miles had taken money. Others believed it had been placed into shell accounts to make it look like he had. By 3:12 a.m., they were exhausted. But one question kept them alive. What if he was the last honest man in a corrupt machine, just too flawed to do it clean? No one answered, because maybe there was no clean way to do it. At 4:05 a.m., they took the final vote. This time, it was unanimous, not because they all agreed, but because they all understood. They filed back into the courtroom at dawn. The sun hadn't even broken the horizon. The audience returned. So did the press. The judge reappeared in his robe, and Aaron Miles stood, emotionless, as the verdicts were read. The silence that followed wasn't relief. It was mourning, not for Miles, but for the system that made a man like him possible. The courtroom was still. The jury had spoken, guilty on 2 of the 4 major counts, tampering with evidence and obstruction of justice. The remaining charges had resulted in a hung jury, divided by doubt, shaped by sympathy. But even 2 convictions were enough to bury a man. Deputy Aaron Miles stood as Judge Elias Ortega prepared to deliver sentencing. He was older than most on the bench. Sharp eyes, a slow voice, and a reputation for fairness that bordered on brutal honesty. Today, though, he looked tired, not from the trial, from what it revealed. He removed his glasses, set them beside the gavel, and leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Miles," he began, voice low, heavy, unblinking. "You took an oath. Like every man and woman who wears that badge, you raised your hand and swore to uphold the law. Not to bend it, not to bleed it, not to weaponize it behind closed doors. You swore to protect people. And for a while, I believe you did." He paused, eyes scanning the hushed gallery, then settling back on Miles. "But somewhere along the way, you lost that compass. Whether it was out of fear, frustration, or fatigue, you made a choice. Not once, not twice, but over and over again. You may not have built the corruption, but you fortified it. You became a wall others could hide behind. You helped a broken system breathe longer than it should have. And for that, this court cannot excuse you." The room remained silent. Not even a cough, not a click of a pen, just the truth hanging between man and judgment. "But let me also say this." The judge's voice softened. "Not weaker, just more human. This trial has revealed more than your crimes. It's exposed rot that runs deeper than any one officer, deeper than this court was permitted to pursue. And that haunts me." He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Justice is not about vengeance. It's not about public image. It's about accountability. And sometimes accountability begins with one person brave or broken enough to bear it." He looked at Miles one last time. "You were not the first to fail the system. But today, you will be the first to answer for it." A beat passed. Then he delivered the sentence. "Aaron Miles, you are hereby sentenced to 9 years in federal prison, with eligibility for parole after 6. You will also forfeit your pension, and you will never serve in law enforcement again." The gavel struck once, sharp, final, absolute. But before the bailiffs could move, the judge raised a hand. "And to the Brookhaven Police Department, know this. This court may have closed the case against one man, but it has opened the door on 1,000 questions. And I promise you, justice does not stop at a storage locker." Miles didn't cry. He didn't speak. He simply nodded, as if he already knew. Because deep down, he wasn't just carrying his own guilt. He was carrying everyone else's too. And now, finally, he'd set it down.